new media and technoculture, impact of internet in developing countries, mobile communications, political economy of development, religion and new media, cyber culture, and social movements. It's indeed a great opportunity and privilege to have such an eminent luminary to talk with us today on the topic, making sense of the post-COVID-19 global political order. We are eagerly waiting to listen to you. Hearty welcome to you, sir, to this international webinar series.
Can I begin? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you're audible.
Thank you, Rajalakshmi, for that introduction. Very humbling introduction. Respected Principal, Sri A. Rajan, my dear friends, Harilal, Darshana, and Jaymatthew, Sri Alencia, the coordinators, Santosh Kumar and Rajalakshmi, dear students and other participants. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this webinar for letting me a part of this interesting initiative. This is in fact a very adventurous initiative as well. I mean, something that spans for 3-4 days, inviting international panelists to participate in the webinar, structuring it in a way that makes a lot of meaning to the whole process. And finally, letting your own student community benefit from these exercises. So let me congratulate you once again for this wonderful initiative. Most of the things that I would have wanted to say are already mentioned by Harilal in his very interesting speech. Let me also start from the concept that he introduced, so as to have a continuity for our discussion, global village. The fundamental abstraction that we can have for the idea of the global village will still consist of 3 basic entities. One is, of course, the state. The other is the market. And then the third is the civil society. So when you think of a global political order, about which Harilal also spoke in very interesting ways, the ways in which these 3 fundamental entities have transformed, an inquiry into how these fundamental entities are transforming themselves in the wake of the COVID pandemic. This assumes importance, particularly in terms of understanding the restructuring of the global political order. Harilal interestingly spoke about the changes that are happening in the world economic order, which is, I think, a fundamental understanding that we need to weave into this discussion at any point of time. He basically spoke from what Gramsci would call, the optimism or the will. There is also the other side of it, which is the pessimism of the intellect. The kind of opportunities that the COVID pandemic has opened up has to be juxtaposed against the kind of challenges it has posed. For some of the fundamental political ideas of our time, like freedom, democracy, transparency, governance, governmentality, etc. These are all very basic political concepts that are deeply interwoven with both the economy and the society in a historical manner as well. When I look at the time of the event, the occurrence of the COVID pandemic, where exactly were these three entities standing? And how did the pandemic affect the way in which independently, autonomously, these three entities function, as well as in their deeper interdependence? The first thing that comes to my mind is that the entity to understand the deep import of this moment in its entirety was in fact the state. Globally, the moment of the advent of the corona pandemic was also coincidentally a phase of the re-emergence of conservative politics and right-wing forces. From 1980s onwards, we know that globally there has been a shift from the concept of a welfare state to neoliberal ideas. This began to happen in the 70s, particularly after the closure of what we call the, a golden age of global capitalism, the period from 1950 to 1970. The successive economic crisis that happened in the 1970s was used as an opportunity by the global corporates and many national governments to take a relook at the dynamics of and the structural aspects of the welfare state. Let me bring in a very interesting point about how this whole discussion emerged in the 1970s. One of the world intellectuals who caught up with the times instantly and engaged a philosophical dialogue with neoliberalism was Michel Foucault. I'm really surprised when I look back in the 1970s, when neoliberalism had not become an ideology of the nation states as it has now emerged. When the corporates were also, kind of engaging with very fundamental ways in which they can introduce neoliberal ideas into the minds of the world leadership. Foucault understood the immediate import of this particular ideology. No other intellectual at that point of time, particularly coming from an ostensible Marxist perspective, or someone who has been familiar with the radical understanding of society and history, had at that point of time thought about engaging with neoliberalism like Foucault did. And this was not just a peripheral engagement. He engaged with people like Hayek, Gary Becker, the most important ideologues of bourgeois economics of his time, who were actually preparing the groundwork, the background for making neoliberalism the global ideology soon. And Foucault understood this. I mean, why? I was trying to understand why Foucault was interested in this. Foucault was interested in understanding this particular phenomenon precisely because of the framework that he has been using until then to understand transition of global capitalism, which he interestingly, captures in his dynamic concept called governmentality. He understood that the global governmentality is now going to change from the idea of the welfare state to a neoliberal state. That is the reason why I think Foucault was so keen to engage with the neoliberal ideologues of the 1970s, who were largely invisible at that time in the global scenario. Many of them got Nobel Prizes and etc. At a later stage. Foucault, because of his keen historical eye, had an impassioned involvement in the discussion because he immediately grasped that this is actually a moment of change in the governmentality at the global level. Understanding this particular moment at that point of time was extremely important. There are criticisms that he was sympathetic to neoliberalism. I mean, he was never sympathetic to anyone in that sense if you understand him in a different way. He has actually, he is only, trying to explain certain global processes rather than taking sides with that. I mean, it will be too reductive to say that, okay, Foucault sided with it. I mean, of course, there are instances in passages that you can quote to say that, for example, he was, interested in this. But he was interested in this because the experiment with the state by the corporates during the golden age of capitalism from 1950 to 1970 had global consequences as well. Had global consequences, and that is precisely why he was interested in an ideological process that was trying to, in a certain way, dismantle this state-centered corporate capitalism that reigned the world at that point of time. So he understood that the global economic order and the global political order are now going to change. This is extremely important because from 1980s onwards, we saw an onslaught on the welfarist ideas all over the world. We know about the Dunkel draft. We know about the debates in WTO. We know about how structural adjustment program was imposed on several African, Latin American, and Asian countries, including India. Yesterday, in a talk, I was actually mentioning about the early 1980s, when neoliberalism actually stepped into India, not in 1991. It was when Indira Gandhi approached the World Bank for a loan. For the first time, World Bank insisted that India should follow structural adjustment program. And this was concealed from the parliament. Indian Express newspaper actually brought this up. They dug up the files and then made it public. And Indira Gandhi had to be defensive about it. And there was criticism that she hid this from the parliament. That actually was the moment, the chaotic moment, was the advent of neoliberalism to India. And later on, like in 1986, for example, the new education policy, which was basically reorganizing the education sector to match with the neoliberal ideas. Several such programs followed, and 1991, obviously, there was a great leap forward in terms of implementing neoliberal ideas in India. But then what happened later on is that riding on the neoliberal ideas, the conservative right was immediately able to reconfigure their illiberal ideologies and put them forward for experimentation in different nation states. As we know, this global village is also a constellation of nation states. Nation state is actually an entity that global corporates simultaneously find it as convenient and inconvenient. It's convenient because it becomes their representative in different parts of the world. Inconvenient because the mediation of the nation state is important in implementing their agenda. So in a liberal democracy itself underwent several transformations during this particular phase. And as a culmination of these developments, the emergence of neoliberal ideology at the global level, this is becoming the ideology of global capitalism as well as many of the nation states. And then, as a corollary of these developments, illiberal regimes, illiberal ideologies becoming popular across the world, particularly after 2000. I mean, you can always say that, okay, it is the September 11 incident that triggered off conservative ideology across the world. I don't believe so, because there were very visible trends even before, much before that this was going to happen. There were in many of the places, for example, in Greece in the 1990s itself, the conservative right was actually becoming very prominent. The world over, they were kind of getting prominence in political circles. So it was not triggered by any particular event in that sense. It was a historical process, a transition within the larger transformation of governmentality that Foucault could very well envisage in 1970s itself. And this particular governmentality is what we now need to disentangle and understand. The moment of the COVID pandemic was in that sense an opportunity for the conservative states to bring in and experiment with some of their cozy ideas. As I told you in the beginning, an entity that understood the significance of the lockdown was indeed the state. We know the philosophical world is now divided between the views of Agamben and Zizek on this particular aspect. There are nuances to the ideas that both have propounded. I don't want to reduce that the whole philosophical world is now in a binary of Agamben's ideas and Zizek's ideas. That's not what I mean by this. But this two contrasting set of ideas that both Agamben and Zizek came out with in the context of the pandemic gives us an opportunity to discuss how the three entities that I mentioned in the beginning, state, market, and civil society, are trying to adapt to the context of the global pandemic. Let me first start with the state itself. As we know, the lockdown provided an immense opportunity for the state to try how they can intervene at the moment of a disaster like this, where people have to be confined to their homes, if they have homes. Or in other words, how crowds can be prevented. We know that there is a whole lot of discussion on multitude and crowd, Canetti and Agamben and others have put forward. A very interesting conversation in itself, a very interesting discourse in itself. Instead of going into the details of that, let us look at this possibility of the state, that you can contain the crowds, that you can prevent people from coming out. As Harilal clearly said, this has a major consequence for the market. I'll come to that later. But when the crowd is pulled up inside as individuals, isolated completely from each other in a certain sense, mediated through media technologies in a certain other sense, the opportunity for the state was to experiment with this isolation of individuals from coming into collectives. The political possibility was immense. And that is precisely why I think the arbitrary way in which many of the nation states gladly followed the WHO instruction in both letter and spirit and went in for lockdown. The the real effect of the lockdown is not that billions of people were confined to their homes during the lockdown period. The real impact of this is that there is an ideological capital that has been invested into the minds of the people about how they should behave in the society in future. That we are vulnerable to such pandemics, such disasters, and there is a way in which society should respond to this, in which we become over-dependent on the state. And that, I think, is the reason why Agamben was insistent on saying that this is the moment of the state of exception. This is the moment of the state of exception because this is actually explained to the citizens that the sovereignty of the state is something that you cannot challenge. The ultimate sovereignty of the state, which is beyond any constitution, because constitution is always seen by Agamben as a kind of unstable thing, because as I was explaining the other day, in another context, Indira Gandhi declared emergency not from anywhere else. It's a clause in the constitution itself. To explain very simply what Agamben meant, it's a clause in the constitution that the state can actually suspend human rights. The states can actually, do the surveillance that they like. That they can be opaque. That they can censor the media. Is already in the constitution. I mean, constitution has many aspects. I mean, there is no reason why states should actually cling on to this particular clause. I mean, but there are moments when they cling on to it, then the citizens are helpless. And that's the point that I am trying to, kind of invoke here today. Not that the constitution in itself is unstable. I mean, it is unstable in a certain theoretical and philosophical sense. And it ought to be so. I mean, it has to be dynamic. It has to change, according to times. But the way it changes depends on many other factors. I mean, not only the it need not move into one single direction. I mean, it can take multiple directions. The other entity that was deeply affected by the pandemic, in fact, is the market. I mean, he talked about the disruption in the global trade, in the value chain, etc. But that is where I beg to differ with him in a small way. If you think about this moment of disruption of the global value chain as well as global trade, I myself think that the global corporates understand this as a very transient phase. The unfortunate thing about global corporates was that the moment of the pandemic, although for them politically it's a good time where kind of conservative ideas were gathering support across the world. In an economic sense, after 2000, the world has seen many economic depressions. 4 consecutive depressions in a span of 2 decades. This is unheard in the history of capitalism. There were successive crises in 20th century. 10 years, 15 years intervals were there. 4 successive crises from 2000 to 2020. This constant occurrence of trade cycles, about which also Harlal mentioned, is a phenomenon that happened after 2000. There are many reasons why it has happened. I mean, the coming of the digital revolution has been one of the reasons that contributed to this, because the kind of unemployment, technological unemployment that the digital revolution has created the world over, nobody has taken a clear estimate of that. Now European Union and United States of America and other capitalist countries are coming out with the idea of the 4th industrial revolution, in which they for the first time agree that there is no replacement for the macroeconomic dislocation of labor that is being created by technological revolution. Earlier, the whole claim, whenever a new technological revolution appears on the horizon, their claim was, okay, there is a dislocation, but new jobs will be created elsewhere. Now European Union itself has considered that no new job is created elsewhere. No new job is created elsewhere. So there is actually a deep problem for the global corporates, but that lies not in the disruption of, of course, that has a major part to play. I'm not undermining his important point, but there is another side to it. The problem lies in the effective demand. In the problem of unemployment, in the problem of reduction of income for workers, which is creating a realization crisis for global capital at this point. When global capital was already going through a realization crisis, and that was the moment in which the COVID pandemic emerged, which actually added to the woes of global capitalism. The global capitalism now has to rethink its strategies vis-a-vis the state. How the nation states should help corporates to overcome the two-pronged I think there was. So, am I audible now? Can
Yes.
somebody respond, please?
Yes, yes. Now,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible.
And then the second aspect is this particular, problem of global dip in effective demand that was already created by the technological unemployment unleashed by capitalist development itself, from the period of late 1990s, from the period of the dot-com bubble to through the last two decades. And their only solution is universal basic income. Because they can't actually think of replacing the displaced labor in any other sectors in an innovative way. That chapter is almost closed for the global economic order. They have to live with the fact that there will be a technological unemployment from hereafter at the global level, which the global capital will not be able to resolve in any amicable manner that is palatable to even global capitalism. So the way in which the global political order is going to change has a deep connection with the way in which the global economic order is going to change. And this is precisely why a new rationale has set in for legislations within nation states. And a typical example is the kind of legislation that has happened in the last few days in India. There are two sets of legislations that really happened. I will conclude in 2 minutes. The agrarian reform bills and the labor reform bills both have a rationale, underlying rationale that unifies these two a set of legislations. Both open the door for whimsical management of the economy, both of the productive forces and the labor power for the corporates. This idiosyncratic manner in which corporates can now manage both the productive forces and labor power. Labor power is also part of it in a certain sense, for some distinct clarity that I'm separating it out. The way in which they can manage the economy and labor, and to make it less abstract, the way in which they can manage the resources and also human labor is now more direct than before. This is the way in which state and capital are going to work together in the post-COVID period. States are now increasingly going to become mere representatives of global corporates. And this is precisely where the threat lies, the danger lies. A civil society conveniently, suitably confined to their privacies. The global village is now open for the state and capital to explore the way in which colonialism would have explored the world 300, 400 years ago. This is where we are currently standing. And this is precisely the moment where I think the optimism of the bill that we could hear in Harilal's presentation becomes very important, but not from the point of view of the state helping us to come out of the house, but civil society becoming a major locus of defending human rights, freedom, transparency, and democracy. The post-pandemic world and the political and economic order that it is building up needs to be thoroughly examined, and wherever it does not match with our idea of democracy and freedom, we need to oppose it. Whether such a collective is possible now or later depends upon the way in which we are able to respond to this global of both the corporates and nation states. Of course, as I told you, nation states is a constellation which is also governed by governed by the laws and customs and norms set by the World Economic Order. So I don't think there is a fundamental change in the global division of labor. That is not going to happen immediately. The post-capitalist economic structure is not going to change fundamentally at this point. But the way in which it is governed is going to change. So the governmentality that Foucault identified in the 1970s is now undergoing a drastic change. Are we able to make sense of this transition in a political way and organize and mobilize against it in much more meaningful ways than we have been able to do in the past, is the fundamental question that I think we need to discuss deeply in the context of the post-COVID scenarios that has emerged at the global level and at multiple local levels. I know that there was an instruction to me also to go bilingual in this speech, but unfortunately, I actually forgot about that. And then, in case any of them still require a summary in Malayalam, I think probably I can still provide it, but I don't want to eat into the time of other speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for making me part of this wonderful initiative.
Thank you, sir, for this highly informative and insightful talk. Now, I invite Dr. Renju Krishnan, Head of the Department of Physics, to proceed with the interactive session. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Rajalakshmi. First of all, I would like to thank our distinguished speaker for giving us enough food for thought, especially on the topics like neoliberalism and the global village, some of the most discussed terms in the present scenario. Now, the session is open for discussion. Participants can interact with the speaker by raising questions, and they can either use the raise the hand option or the chat box for asking their questions. So I now request all the participants to get actively involved in the interaction session. Actually, we had a talk on a highly relevant portion. So I am sure that most of the participants will be having a lot more doubts in them. So please, I request them to make good use of this chance to ask questions to Dr. Srikumar.
Hello, sir.
Yes, Muhammad Muhsin, you can ask now.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. You may ask now, please.
Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
sir. Sir, yes, first of all, thank you for our honorable guest. And you're saying that the lockdown created an opportunities for the conservatives, but today the vocals of privatization and liberalization still exist there in the senses of what you say. Even in your speech, you have mentioned regarding the agri bills and even the privatization of space technology and all that. Then how can we predict such an implicit transition towards such a concept of socialist state, sir?
You know, I did not say that we are going to a socialist state. On the other hand, I said, you know, like these processes are getting intensified in a way that the quantitative change is actually leading to a qualitative change as well. So as so that even the governmentality is changing. I'm not saying that the new governmentality is a socialist one. I mean, it's a much more dangerous illiberal. I mean, illiberal means, you know, we are discarding some of the earlier concerns that we thought are important for the survival of a nation state, you know, like freedom, democracy, transparency, etc. Those, you know, those ideals are being discarded. Those ideals are being made redundant in our social fabric. And this helps only the state and the corporation. That's what I was trying to say. So the transition is actually from a you know, liberal, neoliberal framework to an illiberal framework. I mean, that was the point that I was trying to drive home. This is actually a moment of intensification of earlier conservative trends, plus that actually becoming, in a Gramscian sense, the hegemonic ideology of our times as well. And that was the point that I wanted to emphasize in this talk.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Muhsin, for your question. Any more questions?
In fact, any of them have any further questions, they can send a mail to me as well. I'll respond to them, students.
So if there are no more questions, let us wind up this session by congratulating Dr. Srikumar for his highly relevant and informative talk. Thank you very much, sir, for spending time with us. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Over to Rajalakshmi. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Harilal sir. Do you want to respond to the presentation?
No,
Hello, sir.
no.
Sir, could you please unmute your mic?
Unmute, please.
Okay. Oh. I'll make one or two brief observations. In fact,
yes, sir, please.
Dr. Srikumar's presentation was in a way complementary to what I said. There are broad areas of agreement, and he has pointed out certain gaps in my presentation, which is true, like the effective demand, you know, which is going to be a major threat for the global capitalism now. Inequality has grown so much everywhere in the world, so that there is real problem of realization In fact, realization crisis is going to really worsen. And I, in my presentation, didn't really touch upon this, but my articles in EPW, both the pieces about which you have referred, I've dealt with this question of inequality at length. So thank you, Srikumar, for highlighting that point. And I also think that I was a bit too optimistic in my presentation. It is true that there was an overdose of optimism there. We cannot be very optimistic in the context of global capitalism and its hegemony, but I have this gut feeling that the pandemic, which is refusing to go, is going to really disrupt the global system in a major way. The inequality, for example. All these policies which are designed to help capital everywhere, and that is going to ruin capital. That is the kind of contradiction that we are living in. The kind of stimulus packages announced in various states, they've all helped the finance capital, but that is going to land the world in more trouble. So that is a ray of hope. In fact, the real contradiction of the system will make sustainability of the present order difficult. That's why I told we cannot be very optimistic about our political leadership, political movements and all. In fact, we don't see many optimistic kind of scene in the global scenario of politics. But the pandemic is working in a very drastic way, which would make the system unsustainable, and it will probably throw up movements. And I agree that, as Srikumar was mentioning, we should look forward to civil society and life in the civil society, which should be giving us direction in the future. Thank you, Srikumar. It was really interesting presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. That is an excellent clarification. I do agree with you on all the points that you mentioned.
We are meeting after a long time.
Yeah, we should thank the college for that opportunity as well. I mean, this was something that we used to do on an everyday basis. These